Maisy has been one of the most volatile brawlers since her release, going from a mediocre brawler to one of the best in the game, to one of the worst in the game, and then finally to one of the best in the game, being overtuned like crazy. In this video, I'll take a look at Maisy and her kit, and then talk about her history and balancing, or lack thereof, leading her to currently being one of the strongest brawlers in the game. As always, make sure you like, subscribe, and comment. Only 15% of you are subscribed, so try and get that number up. Maisy was chosen by my channel members, so if you want the chance to choose future PowerPoint brawlers, then consider becoming a channel member for that and other cool perks. Let's start out with the basics of Maisy first. Maisy has 7200 health and 720 movement speed, which is normal. Maisy shoots one projectile that has an 8.67 tile range. And it's interesting in that it starts out slow but gets faster the further the shot goes. The attack deals 3000 damage, and she has a normal reload speed of 1.5 seconds, and a small attack width of 0.67. Maisy has alright stats overall, but she has pretty unique stats for the marksman class. She has a pretty high health, and a pretty low range for a brawler considered a marksman. Her attack is very interesting, and she's one of the hardest brawlers to consistently hit shots with, as auto-aim is basically impossible with her, forcing manual aiming at every shot due to her attack starting out very slow, and her small attack width. Let's talk about Maisy's super now. Maisy's super has a 0.5 second delay, but once the delay ends, it creates a shockwave in a 4.33 tile radius around herself that pushes all enemies 3 tiles away from her, while also dealing 2480 damage to each enemy. For each enemy she hits, she charges 39% of her super. This is one of the main arguments for her being a controller, as merely having the super is enough to force enemies back, and using it can force enemies out of a certain area, thereby controlling it. Overall, Maisy is more of a controller than a marksman. Her main attack someone leads into the marksman style, being a single projectile with an okay range, though it isn't really long enough to be considered a true marksman. And she's really not good on traditional marksman maps like Shooting Star or Hideout, but is great in controller modes like Hot Zone and Gem Grab. As I said earlier, her super really allows her to control area as well. Now let's go more in depth about Maisy's main attack. It deals quite good damage, but this is offset by the difficulty it takes to hit the shots. Being able to consistently hit the Maisy shots is no easy feat. With the small attack width, and the fact that it's relatively easy to dodge due to the slow startup the attack has, due to this, it makes being able to predict enemy movement an absolute must-have for being able to consistently hit shots with her. Furthermore, you can't auto-aim with her unless you're at an extremely close range. This means that you have to be extremely careful at mid-range like with Brock, as the shots aren't at their full speed yet, but it isn't close enough to be able to auto-aim. But it is far enough as to where you still need to be able to predict your opponent's movement correctly. Overall, Maisy's attack does require a lot of skill to master, and it's arguably one of the most difficult attacks in the game to consistently hit, which is why you don't see many noobs playing her. Now let's talk about Maisy's super. Maisy's super is essential for her to be good. Sure, it's not as essential to her as other brawlers and their supers, but it's still extremely important for her. The knockback it gives is obviously very good for fighting tanks and assassins, but it's generally important against all brawlers, and allows Maisy to unload important extra shots that can kill the enemy. Even more powerful is their team wiping ability. If Maisy hits all 3 enemies with her super, or hits 2 enemies in one shot, she recharges her super. This can allow her to start chaining supers and cause team wipes, or at least completely disrupt the enemy momentum, giving valuable time on the zone in Hot Zone or a free goal in Brawl Ball. Of course, Maisy's super still has its drawbacks. First and foremost, it's weak to crowd control abilities, due to the 0.5 second delay. If an enemy sees you use Maisy's super, they can easily use a crowd control ability like a stun or a knockback of their own, and cancel Maisy's hard-earned super. Another weakness is the short range that it has, only being 4.33 tiles. Combine this with the delay, and someone can easily move out of the range if they aren't too close to Maisy. This also makes it so that the super is really only good against tanks and assassins, and it's mostly useless against all other classes. Or that would be true if it wasn't for what I'm going to talk about next. Let's now talk about Maisy's unlockables. First off, let's talk about her disengaged gadget. Disengage sees her dash 2.67 tiles forward, and if she's within 2.33 tiles of an enemy, they get stunned. This has three uses. First, getting away from an enemy. The stun and the dash are quite useful at making a quick getaway at low health, especially for someone like a tank or an assassin. Second, getting close to an enemy. Maisy can sometimes feel a little slow, and you might need to get somewhere faster, so this gadget can help with that. However, there is a much bigger use for this, that, let's be real, you all already know. Using it with her super. I won't talk about it too much as it's already super well known, but it helps in creating unpredictability with her super, as enemies can't really judge the range of her super when she uses the gadget alongside of it. Furthermore, it allows Maisy to be able to make use of the super even against other classes, as she basically artificially increases the range of the super. Surprisingly, Maisy has a second gadget. Maisy's second gadget is Finish Them, which sees her reload 1 ammo and increase her next attack damage by 30% of the opponent's missing health. This is an interesting gadget and can give Maisy a surprise kill as the enemy probably won't expect this gadget. However, since Maisy's shots are unreliable already, using this gadget is a risk, especially when her other gadget is so strong for her. Let's now talk about Maisy's star powers. Pinpoint Precision sees her attack damage and supercharge rate increase by 20% at max range. Like Finish Them, this is an interesting star power and gives some use, but the attack isn't easy to consistently hit at max range, so it doesn't give as much value as her other star power, Tremors. Tremors see Maisy's super cause a 2-second slowing effect to each enemy it hits. This is a very useful star power for Maisy, as it 1. Allows Maisy's shots to be much more reliable as the enemies are slowed, and 2. Allows Maisy better team wiping abilities, as the enemies can't escape as far with the slow inflicted on them. Now that we're done with all that, let's start talking about Maisy's history from her release to the present. When she was released, she was a very mediocre brawler. Her super was pretty powerful and easy to use. Since she had a long range, it helped her cover all areas, as she could deal with assassins and tanks quite well with her super. However, her main attack was the real issue on release. It was extremely easy for any skilled player to dodge, so it was really difficult for her to consistently hit shots. Even worse, this meant that getting her super would not be an easy task, and without her super, Maisy wasn't great back then. Her projectile speed was very slow, and her main attack damage wasn't great either. However, her super wasn't as good as it was today. This is because her disengaged gadget was crazy back then, and went in the opposite direction as where you were facing, basically making the super and gadget combo impossible to execute. Due to all of these reasons, Maisy was due for a big buff, and boy did she get one. First and most importantly, her projectile speed was increased. This made her main attack much more useful, and harder to dodge. Of course, it was still one of the harder attacks to hit consistently, but it wasn't as egregious as it was on release. Second, her pinpoint precision star power was buffed, and become quite powerful, though obviously it was still very situational. Finally, her disengaged gadget was reworked to how it is now, allowing for the gadget to actually be useful, and combined with her super to be an actual threat. This was a solid buff, and she managed to remain in a comfortable spot in the meta for a bit after this. And then as always, the Hypercharge Nation attacked. Maisy's Hypercharge is Aftermath, which sees Maisy's super also sending out 6 main attacks like Hank's super. Even with just stat buffs, this easily buffed her to an S tier brawler, but the Hypercharge itself was pretty good for her. Obviously, the main attacks gave her a lot of extra damage, but more importantly, they would charge the same amount of super as the main attack would. This gave Maisy's Hypercharge super a lot of chaining capability, as long as you didn't waste it, and if you could get multiple Hypercharge supers, there would be almost no way you miss one of her extra attacks. Overall, it was great for her, and allowed her super to be even more powerful and controlling, making the entire area around her a no-go zone. She was a bit too strong though, and required nerfs, which Supercell happily gave her. First off, they increased the amounts of hits necessary for Maisy to charge up her super, from 3 to 4. This destroyed Maisy, as her super is extremely important for her, and required her to rely even more on her inconsistent main attack, as she would need to hit 4 shots now to be able to charge up her super. This also reduced her team wipe ability for obvious reasons. If this wasn't enough, Maisy's Hypercharge speed and shield boost were decreased. This wasn't a huge nerf, but combined with the other nerf to Maisy, this was the final nail in Maisy's coffin. Maisy slowly fell down the meta, from S to B to D tier as more and more Hypercharges released, and Maisy in her weak state just couldn't compete with the new meta. Supercell gave her a few okay buffs like her super recharge rate and a buff to the pinpoint precision star power, but this didn't really help her out much, so Supercell decided to start taking drastic measures and start buffing her damage. Why damage? Your guess is as good as mine. First, her damage was increased from 1280 to 1400. Then it was decided that this wasn't enough, and the damage went from 1400 to 1500, which is 3000 at a max power level. There is genuinely no reason for Maisy's attack to deal 3000 damage. That's nearly how much Piper deals at a max range. For a brawler that is more super reliant and the main attack is supposed to be not great, you can see what happens when you buff the main attack like crazy. The brawler becomes broken. Instead of addressing some of her actual issues, like her supercharge rate and her still too slow projectile speed, they decided to overtune her damage, and add to everyone's favorite thing, damage inflation. This, and the rise of the aggro meta recently, have combined to make Maisy one of the most powerful brawlers in the game currently, and a comfortable S tier brawler. Overall, Maisy is one of the most interesting brawlers in the game. Her main attack is very difficult to consistently hit, and her super is extremely important for her, but it can't reach its full potential without having the correct unlockables. As for Maisy herself, she has been up and down in the meta, as the devs still try to figure out how to properly balance her, as she's had stints in the top of the top and the bottom of the bottom in the meta. Anyway, thanks for watching. Watch this video, or this playlist, or join the Discord server.